This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Can I welcome everyone to the Police and Crime Committee meeting this morning. We're going to be looking at serious injury collisions in London with the Metropolitan Police Service, and we will then move on to our monthly question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime in the second half. Now, can I first ask, please, can everyone make sure that all electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions? And can I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. We've not received any apologies for absence, but Assembly Member Ahmad is joining us remotely.
Thank you. And welcome, Assembly Member Ahmad, remotely. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare? I should possibly declare that I'm a member of Road Peace. Then, can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of December 2023 to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you. And can we note the completed, outstanding and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee? Excellent. So we now move on to our main item of business, and I would like to welcome our first panel of guests from the Metropolitan Police Service. So we have Detective Chief Superintendent Andy Cox, OCU Commander for the Transformation Programme and NPCC Lead for the Collision Investigation Programme. Welcome. We have Acting Detective Superintendent Ross Morrell from the Roads and Transport Policing. We have Superintendent Dan Card, North East Basic Command Unit. We have Commander Kyle Gordon from Frontline Policing. And I think you're also National Lead for
Roads Operations Investigations.
Thank you very much. And Pauline Pateman-West, who is Head of Met Prosecutions. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for coming and being here together so that we've got all the right people to answer all of the questions. Now, in the first session where we were hearing from people involved in legal cases, from victims, from campaigners, one of the things that came up was the business of what is the definition of a serious injury collision, and because there are different definitions, and who gets to investigate what. And I just wondered if we could just clear that up at the top of the meeting. I don't know, is that something for you, Kyle, to take?
Thank you very much, Chair. It won't surprise you that I've brought a number of subject matter experts with me today to make sure we get this absolutely right to your satisfaction. So I'll ask Ross if he'll pick that up from the Roads and Transport Policing Command.
Yes, so currently my team, the Serious Collision Investigation Unit, take all fatal collisions and serious personal injury collisions. The definition is the Transport of Department's definition. In essence, anything that equates to a GBH injury is considered as serious.
And what about because that's probably, is that about 100 collisions a year that you take through the Serious Collision Investigation Unit?
Yes, it's about that.
Okay, and so there's a lot of other collisions that count, that you know have serious implications for the person injured. So you know, sort of broken limbs, things that can make a real difference in terms of your ability to do your job and whatever. So what happens to the bulk of the collisions? Is that in the order of 3,000+?
Yes, and that's undertaken by MO10, so it's Met Prosecutions.
So, and that goes through Marlow.
To Pauline, yes.
Goes to Pauline at Marlow House.
Yes, so anything that's reported via single or line home, and that does include some serious, will be dealt with by my unit. If there is any indication of driving under the influence, then the BCU would retain primacy for that secondary investigation. Any other criminality involved, that would be retained by the BCU. And also, if there is any indication of dangerous driving, then that should also be retained by the BCU to retain primacy for the ongoing secondary investigation.
And just to be clear, so that's another, so the ones that don't get taken by the SCIU, but that where there is an indication of driving under the influence or dangerous driving, those go to the BCU for are those investigated at BCU level rather than by the SCIU team?
Yes.
So does that sit with you, Dan?
Yes, the initial response to obviously the Ross's team deals with the very, very serious personal injury collisions. The ones that fall beneath that are generally reported by frontline policing, BCU, and then after the initial investigations are done, it goes to Pauline's team for the backup. The other thing I'd probably say, just to give you some context, is because of the way injuries are recorded, you do get some anomalies. So, for example, if you fall off your push bike or you fall off your motorcycle and you were to break a finger, that would be considered a serious injury because it's a broken bone. However, you might not necessarily have a life-changing injury because of it. So it's sometimes slightly more difficult and nuanced to pick out the exact level of injuries when we talk about serious injuries, because people automatically think, you know, that's going to be something significant. Sometimes it isn't, and it's at the lower end of serious, but that's not me playing down the effect that it has on people, but just to give you some idea of how it's recorded in context.
Yes, so there's a range of injuries that are covered by the term serious.
Yes.
And that could range from things that people really would think of as serious in, you know, common everyday speaking, to something smaller like a broken finger or kind of twisted ankle or... Oh no, twisted ankle wouldn't be because there's no broken bone.
No, that would be a slight. That's the problem. As I say, there's quite a sliding scale in that.
Okay, and so the numbers, just to get a sense of the scale of the numbers of collisions that are being investigated at BCU level, how many roughly are being dealt with in a year?
Chair, I wonder, just whilst some of those figures might be being looked at, I should have started off by giving a little bit of context. I thought maybe you were just clarifying the first point, and then we would move in. I think it might be useful just to set that context for the Met in terms of the sheer volume and scale of what is being dealt with.
That would be very helpful.
So London's roads are incredibly busy. You will know that without me having to state the obvious. There are some 2.6 million vehicles registered within the capital. According to the TfL website, they travel an estimated 19 billion miles per annum across 9,200 miles of road. What that meant was that in 2023, according to the figures I have been given, that resulted in around 115,000 reported collisions, broken down roughly as 82,000 damage only and 32,000 with injury, and approximately 3,500 of these classed as serious. And of course, as we all know, and you know this is near and dear to my heart as the national lead, it also resulted in almost 100 people tragically losing their lives on London's roads. In addition to this, of course, the Met also responds to some 36,000 reported road traffic offences coming into our call centres as well. Despite all of this volume, and that is a lot of volume, the Met reached the I-grade calls for injury road traffic collisions within the target of 15 minutes, almost 78% of the time, and a median time of arrival of 10 minutes and 15 seconds. And S-grade calls, so the ones that sit just underneath that immediate injury road traffic collisions, were reached over 85% of the time within the target of 60 minutes, with a median response time of around 21.5 minutes. And of course, none of this happens in a vacuum. you know, it has been widely discussed, both here and further afield, the challenges that the Met is currently under in terms of finances, capacity and sheer volume, leading to pieces of work like the Right Care, Right Person that thankfully is starting to create some of that capacity on the front line. As the national lead for roads policing's operations, investigations and intelligence, and of course that's why I've brought Andy Cox with me today, as he is my deputy in one of those fields, these matters are near and dear to our heart. But what I can say from a national perspective then, looking in, and it is fortunate for the Met that they do have 2 serving senior officers who are both national leads. But of course, when His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary Fire and Rescue Service back in 2019-2020 did the first deep dive on roads policing across the whole of the United Kingdom. Whilst not perfect, the Metropolitan Police Service was very much seen as the gold standard, both in terms of capability and capacity. So having a dedicated standalone roads and transport policing command with the resources that we have and the capability that we have within that. So things like having PIP level 2 detectives working on these investigations and the Forensic Collision Investigation Unit having the strength that it does. So it is useful just to give that context because, of course, we are, I imagine, going to start having a conversation about times when victims may have felt let down or when we could have done things better. But given that the volume that the Met is dealing with across the whole piece, given what we have with that sheer volume of collisions being reported into us, I just wanted to set that context. It might help then some wider understanding as the questions are asked.
Thank you. That's really helpful. What about just the way that the different collisions are categorised into the different types of investigation? You know, is it obvious what gets looked at by the SCIU and what gets looked at by the at BCU level?
Yeah, so I'll bring in Ross and Dan in a second, but of course, as any call comes into the Met Control Centre, it is triaged through what we call the Thrive process. So the call itself will be examined against a number of criteria: the threat, the harm, the investigative opportunities, etc. And it will then be tasked out accordingly. Either the immediate grade call, the standard grade call, or maybe even a follow-up thereafter. Attendance at the scene by the original attending officers will then help colour how the initial perceptions of those collisions are graded and what investigation follows thereafter. There will, of course, be times whenever the initial assessment doesn't pan out. As I say, when you look at the number of damage only that are reported at over 80,000 into the Met call centre, of course, we will all know from our professional and private lives that a number of those will then go on to be injury collisions at a later stage that may not have been reported in, and that is why thereafter, so when the officers arrive at the scene, the initial assessment of that will primarily drive whereabouts that falls, whether within the Serious Collision Investigation Unit or sitting with the BCU, but of course the initial assessment may not be the final assessment. I'm wondering if Ross wants to add any more detail to that.
Yes, but basically my team would take anything that's life-threatening, life-changing or fatal, and that's as declared by the hospital. So my team's SCIU would deploy to all of those incidents, as well as the frontline policing officers. If, as we've said, that things do change, and I often describe it as a sort of like sports injuries, that people walk off and are fine and then later discover that something's wrong. The same can happen with people that go to hospital, that they go to hospital and are okay, and then a week later there's complication and something changes. So we do always get those. What we've done recently is introduced a new basically advice that any of my teams are deployed. Every time they're deployed, they will give the BCU officers a structured written advice if we aren't taking on the investigation ourselves, in line with what we do with murders now. So all serious road traffic accidents are treated the same as murders now. we give the advice, because we was aware that some officers might not know what to do, and generally might be a bit concerned or worried that they haven't dealt with something like that before. So we've now got the written advice goes to the officers at scene, the BCU commanders, and the investigation lead on the BCU.
And so does that include a sort of checklist of
Yeah,
things
it's
that need... Yeah.
basically a full investigation plan.
Thank you. The Mayor's Vision Zero action plan has sort of says it's going to enhance and drive excellence in collision investigation. So, Kyle, what work has been done within the Met to kind of push on that drive for excellence in collision investigation, as stated in the Mayor's plan?
Yeah, so of course the Met sign up fully to the Vision Zero plan, and it's something I have been pushing nationally as well. In terms of what work has been done, actually, it is important to set out that benchmark that the Metropolitan Police Service, in terms of capability and capacity for investigations, is seen very much as the national standard. Some of the work that Andy has done for me nationally with the College of Policing and the National Police Chiefs Council right across the United Kingdom to bring up the standard of investigators so that they have those the PIP2, as we call it, the investigative qualification, was work that the Met already had. We have a dedicated serious collision investigation unit, which many forces do not have. The forensic collision investigation unit, of course, is one of the best, if not the best, in the United Kingdom. So the standard that you get, the standard that already existed at the time of the HMIC FRS inspection, already evidenced that we were providing a very, very high level. Andy, is there anything else you want to add from the national work into the Met?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. Morning, everybody. I suppose just for context, I mean, I've approached Carl, I think, in around about 2019 to seek his support to set up a national collision board. As somebody that's worked on murder investigation and crash investigation, I recognised the two were seen very differently in terms of priority and skill set, and actually yet they're exactly the same. They're investigating the death of somebody, often in criminal circumstances, and often needing all the same expertise, specialisms and excellence to really lead to a effective investigation, supporting crash victims and their families, and ultimately bringing offenders to justice. So the national board was set up. That invited every force to it. The Met obviously included, and I was in the Met at that time. So it's really a useful exercise to bring together key leads from around the country, talk about good practice, talk about strategy, but really to give recognition to the role. And I'd say that as part of that, we included external partners into the meeting. So Highways England, Road Peace, for example, were included, Motor Insurance Bureau, and others such as Legal Services and so on, to really give a wider strategic context and to inform people there to really try and raise standards across the country. We recognise it's not perfect around the country, recognise there's work to do. What I would say is, and this is somebody that's in the Met, but I say it with a neutral head on, the Met is an absolute exemplar across the country around this. We have a senior structure to it. There's no force that, for example, has a superintendent that leads a crash investigation nationally. That's obviously been identified by the HMIC as well, but actually I think practitioners recognise it. We put much more resource into it. We've got dedicated flows that can support crash families, and there's been a whole load of work to do to develop those standards. Some of the things that I initially set into train was to make it a detective-based role. For reasons I set out, very similar to murder, we'd have detectives leading murder investigation, but we often had uniform officers leading crash investigation that was fatality related. So we wanted to mandate that was detective. My role is very much, as is Carl's to be fair, is around negotiation and influence across the country. Whilst we consider ourselves leads, we have to negotiate and influence local applications. So around the country, ultimately it's local forces that decide what they do. But we did set out recommendations, for example, to make it a detective role, to make sure the FCIN, which is the Forensic Collision Investigation Network, which is essentially about excellence in, because it's a scientific field, so it's about trying to really professionalise that, but to make it independent from the investigators, so it couldn't be seen as influenced or some form of collaboration. So it's independent science, which is the FCIN, which is set up, and the Met apply that really effectively. and then your local investigation, which is now detective-based, and I know the Met are very compliant with those principles as well.
Mm-hmm. So, Andy, just going on, in terms of the national guidance, do you think that has enough influence on the Met's investigations? And I appreciate, everyone has said that what happens at SCIU level is tip-top and amazing. What we did hear in our first meeting was that there were that the people who were representing crash victims and the people who were then seeking support were not they were frustrated by the more paper desk-based processes that happen at the Marlow House End, and that's obviously not your fault, Pauline, but it's So Andy, are you comfortable that the Met is doing enough to give the people investigating stuff at BCU level, i.e. the bigger group of serious collisions, that they've got the support they need to be able to investigate? I mean, are all of those being investigated at detective level, or are some of them not?
So I think, for clarity, my remit really is around the fatal and life-changing injury stuff, which actually not every force has anywhere near the setup the Met has. So the Met is very much the leader around fatal crash and life-changing injuries. Yep. The group has done a load around road danger reduction. For example, the campaigns I have every year around this, which we market through the National Collision Board, just around the whole road danger reduction piece, and particularly around public reporting of road crime, where, again, I'd say the Met is very much one of the key leaders around facilitating the public to make reports, and I think that goes to a preventative agenda, which is really, really important. And actually our resolution or investigative outcomes are really strong around road crime reporting, and I think having the public essentially 24/7 being our eyes and support, as they are in any other crime type, is essential for reducing the amount of collisions we have in London. But I don't feel fully able to comment really on the level below that in terms of, I think that'd probably be for us.
Oh, yes, Kyle.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I suppose there's a blunt answer and there's a slightly more nuanced answer. So I've given you some of the context of where we sit in London. My portfolio currently is also the Met strategic lead for emergency response policing right across the capital. And the reason I mention that as being important is, of course, the first responders to the vast majority of those reported incidents are going to be the response policing functions within the Met. It won't come as any surprise to anybody around this table that actually, like with many other areas within the Metropolitan Police Service, when we have done the demand analysis, if there were more officers to move into that function in a way that balances the threat and risk across the range of portfolios, we absolutely would. On a daily basis, I get the outstanding call list of incidents that we've still got to attend. And of course, road traffic incidents, I've given you some of the figures around that, but there is a lot of risk that sits in the capacity challenges that we have within the Metropolitan Police Service, and we have to prioritise the attendance. The blunt answer, of course, is as the national lead and as a commander for frontline policing, I would love to see greater capacity to be able to provide even more of a service to those crashes that do not make it onto the threshold of the SCIU. But the reality of this is that isn't the case. You will be aware from the conversation that's ongoing between MOPAC and the Metropolitan Police Service under the new Met for London plan, how we are seeking to build the strongest ever neighbourhoods. We're increasing resourcing in and around the uplift in public protection, and all of these are really high-risk areas of business. Roads policing and road traffic collisions fall within the main bundle of other volume stuff that the Met is dealing with. I have had a look in the run-up to this meeting just to refresh myself in terms of what officers are given out on the BCU, so that predominantly all done through the training at Hendon, and they do get an input into road traffic collisions, scene management, investigations, ancillary road traffic offences, and they understand how to pull all of that together. We have new systems coming online, as you will be aware, so the Connect computer system that's going to bring all of our case management intelligence together is absolutely going to enhance that. The Right Care, Right Person programme of work is creating capacity that we never had before, which will enhance our capability. And of course, we need to drive the supervision of those investigations through. But it's not detectives that investigate the vast majority of road traffic collisions in London, as is the case right across the whole of the United Kingdom. It will be those officers responding that will be carrying the most of those investigations. They'll go into the My Investigation support teams, what we colloquially call MIST teams within the Met, who will progress the majority of those that don't make their way in through the route that you've spoken of with Pauline. I would love to be a gold standard right across the board. There isn't, of course, and we have to prioritise on a threat, risk and harm basis those investigations. So the linkages across into the Roads and Transport Policing Command and the SCIU are there, and that's something we have that not many other forces, if any, will have, where we think that something has become sufficiently complex or there are aggravating factors around other offences. But of course, as I say, the bottom line in this, the simple answer is it isn't detectives that investigate the vast majority of these collisions.
Yep. And we heard that, I mean, obviously a murder is investigated by a detective, whereas the road traffic collisions where someone has been killed, where there is criminality or potential criminality that needs to be investigated within the driving that led to the crash, that doesn't necessarily get investigated by a detective.
No, so
what we're saying.
So again, Chair, and I sense there's activity to my right as people want to come in and add fine detail. But again, context is everything in terms of what actually should the standard be. This is national work that we are doing to try and change attitudes towards road harm. So if this is an average day in the United Kingdom, every 23 minutes somebody is killed or seriously injured. That's every 23 minutes. When we walk out of here, if this is an average day in the UK, 2 people will have been killed or seriously injured across the United Kingdom. There's 38 million vehicles on the roads in the United Kingdom. 7 million of those have some sort of non-compliance element. And we have done a lot of work nationally, and including in London, to try and grip that, because we know statistically that people that don't tax their car, insure their car, register the car are also involved in criminality. And we are linking between my portfolio and the National Roads, what we call NERPOI, the National Roads Policing Operations, Investigations and Intelligence. We're linking ourselves across with other operational links at the National Police Chiefs Council to try and close that gap, and we're exploring all sorts of opportunities around identification through electronic number plates and ANPR systems. But the reason I tell you all of that is because this, exactly the point that you had made, Chair, is one of the things that I seek to do nationally. If there was any other policing portfolio where that level of harm to our communities and to individual families within those communities was caused in terms of the volume of people killed and seriously injured, I'd wager that there might be much more of an interest in this subject, and I've held this portfolio for 4 years and continue to make that argument. So you're absolutely right. The linkages between the other investigations and the offences that might sit in and around that with those non-compliant vehicles are absolutely crystal clear, and we do push where we can. So any aggravating factors will escalate the collision to a different level. Mm-hmm. Ross, did you want to come in?
Yes, on the detective part, any road deaths that aren't as a result of a medical sort of episode and involve no one else get investigated by a detective categorically, and that investigation is managed by a senior investigating officer with national qualifications that's qualified to investigate murders, so that without doubt.
Yep, yes, and I totally see that, and I totally appreciate all the capacity issues. I think what we heard was that that people who have very serious life-changing injuries, if they don't get that level of investigation, may actually find it hard to get the compensation they need to get on with their life. I need to move on to Assembly Member Pigeon, but just very briefly, if someone could just give a one-word answer on this, is the underreporting of serious injury collisions that we heard about earlier, is that something that is a serious issue that you're concerned about?
I'd say no. In that we can't categorically say obviously underreporting what level it's at, but we'd consider that due to the nature that people with insurance companies, road vehicles and things like that, that most do get reported.
Okay, thank you. Assembly Member Pigeon.
Lovely, thank you very much. I want to look into the police investigation of serious injury collisions, and I think you set up a few years ago the Forensic Collision Investigation Unit. I think there was a specific direction from the Forensic Science Regulator on that. I'm wondering what impact that establishment of that unit has had on the investigation of serious injury collisions.
I'll pass across to Dan and Ross. Dan was in seat at the time, but it is worth pointing out that we, as in the Metropolitan Police Service, sat on that board. I sat personally on that board because of the volume here. Absolutely support the aims of it, as Andy had said previously. Absolutely critical following the recommendation from the forensic regulator around separating the investigation and the independence of the forensic evidence. So anything that happened in that space would absolutely have enhanced the credibility and the currency of the forensic opportunities around that. But of course, coming from a finite pool of resources, I remember at the time that meant that we had to separate teams out in order to be compliant with both. And once you start dividing the said cake, then you're into potential challenges around just making sure you've got that capacity. Dan, do you want to add anything else?
Just really to clarify that the formation of the FCIU, that work was already being done prior to that and has been done for the last 20 or so years, but it was part of the SCIU before that. And what happened was the forensic regulator mandated that those two work streams needed to be separate to ensure integrity, and that wasn't anything to do with any of the Met's previous activity. It was just for forensic regulation. So in terms of the service delivery, the unit had been split and given different names, but actually there had been not much change in what was delivered to the people of London.
Okay, so it didn't have a huge change in the capital.
Just perhaps add something as well, if I can, thanks. What I would say is their training now is so extensive. So they are trained almost within an inch of their life, to be honest. So the standards can only improve, in essence, because of their professionalism, the accreditation process they have to go through, and it's their sole focus now, whereas it was blurred before, and certainly around the country it was very blurred before. So I think it has given independence and expertise.
Okay, and if I could stick with you, and we heard earlier, I think, Carl, you were talking about, this team is gold standard overall, and, you have got the capability and the capacity, but then we started talking a little bit more about capacity. Andy, do you think the Met has the right level of resources to meet the demands of the serious injury investigations that are placed upon it? What's working well? What needs to change?
So I think in terms of fatal and life-changing, yes, and it's way above.
That,
yes, the top end essentially is way above anywhere else in the country. Has senior leadership levels all the way through, and an extensive amount of investigators as well that are detective-based and have expertise in this field. So I think in terms of that level, 100% yes. But I think I'd almost refer you to Carl's answer around that level below that he gave just now.
To colour some of that in, it is just worth pointing out, so as well as a detective superintendent heading it up, which is unheard of across the United Kingdom and does show the seriousness with which we give it, there's 4 detective inspectors, 16 detective sergeants and 56 detective constables allocated to that. That is a significant resource to be dedicated to road traffic collisions that just doesn't exist anywhere else in the UK. Look, we would always like more. Of course, we would always like more. And if we didn't have all of the competing demands, we may well have more. But that is a significant resource that's dedicated to that function within London. That is just unique in UK policing.
But as you've already mentioned, was it 100 deaths in the last year? So actually, it's probably quite a small resource compared to that sort of volume.
Again, this is part of the challenge when we speak about a fatal road traffic collision, leaving aside the tragic consequences for the family, the community, the loved ones left behind, of course. So everything I say is predicated by understanding that. But of course, the outcome in terms of the injury doesn't in and of itself indicate the complexity of the investigation. So, you know, there could be very, very simple circumstances where a collision occurs, and we see that regularly. You know, maybe somebody on a what we call a power two-wheeler, a motorcycle or a moped, at speed makes a collision with an immovable object. Not a complicated investigation, actually right down the line that you might have something where there's several vehicles involved over a complex topography. So without knowing all of those individual cases, I can't speak to whether or not the 100 equates to not enough, but certainly in the time that I was there, the capacity was sufficient for what we had coming through the door.
And what's your vacancy rate like within the team?
So the vacancy rate at the minute against that, as in the latest workforce figures I have, so there's 13 detective sergeants out of 16 allocated and 41 detective constables out of 56. So there are a number of vacancies sitting across that. But if you compare that to some of the vacancy rates across things like public protection and other units in the Metropolitan Police Service, actually that is quite healthy. Yeah.
But you've still got considerable vacancies there,
there are
which
vacancies,
will restrict the work. And I was trying to follow this earlier, and I'm not sure this was answered. But I think from the previous hearing and my reading on this, the vast majority of serious injury collisions are still not being investigated. Is that right? And who decides what's investigated? Or have I misunderstood that?
There's probably just a bit of context. I don't think they're not investigated. They're not investigated by the SCIU.
Right.
So they will be
investigated. There's this definition between the two.
Yeah. The vast majority will be investigated at the time by frontline police officers, those officers from response teams who will conduct the initial investigation, and then what we would call the secondary investigation would be conducted by Pauline's team in MO10.
Right. Okay. And I'm not sure if we're getting on to this later, so excuse, but who decides what happens with these cases?
So a decision is taken at the time, as Mr. Morrell said earlier, based on the injury level to the victim. Yes. And then other elements of complexity. So if we had a diplomat involved, it might go to the SCIU because of the attention that's going to get, for example. But primarily it's done based on, as Mr. Gordon says, the threat, harm and risk. You know, what's the injury to the victim? How likely are we to be able to deliver a good service because of that? And then we'll take that decision based there. But the majority of them get investigated by the local officers with the support from MO10.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. I think that's all my questions covered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's that very point at the frontline level, at BCU level. So in terms of where does screening out crimes come into that? Because you're describing a process around that gives you that time, but those officers in that first attendance to that call and collecting that evidence, where does it, pressures at various BCUs must lead to inconsistency and a weakness in the processes between you passing it on to other colleagues or not. So how do you, tell us a little bit more, paint a picture of managing those pressures to make sure that we're not losing out in the sense of further investigations and potential prosecutions?
So it starts at the very beginning, as Commander Gordon said, around assessing that threat, harm and risk, about how swiftly we deploy to this incident in the first instance. As Mr. Gordon said, 78% of the time we're meeting our charter time to get there as swift as we can and conduct an investigation. The officer then, their training involves them going through in effect a checklist to say what they're going to look at, which looks at health and safety, medical aid, then the actions of reporting it at the scene, recording it, reporting all videos, speaking to witnesses, checks at the scene to make sure everyone's licensed and insured. And then it's really down to what they're told in terms of medical evidence at the scene. And we are, by and large, led by our colleagues in the London Ambulance Service or HEMS, who will turn up and make an assessment at the scene. As Mr Morrell said, when it's clearly going to, unfortunately, be a fatal incident very quickly, the SCIU will be activated. The challenge is always that bit in the middle as, well, how serious injury is the serious injury? Is it going to be life-threatening? Is it going to be life-changing? If it is, it goes down the SCIU pathway. If it isn't, it's retained by the initial investigating officers who will conduct a number of inquiries and checks and investigations. If there's offences alleged or apparent there, so if you've got somebody drink driving, for example, they would be arrested by the officers at the scene who would then follow that case up. If there is a slightly less serious, if you excuse the context of it, offence, then they would be reported, and that would all go on our reporting system, Copper. And then once that's uploaded onto Copper, those secondary investigations would be taken forward by Pauline's team in MO10 to support a prosecution or provide information to the insurance companies.
But what evidence can you provide in terms of consistency and performance across all BCUs in terms of that level of that first responder, if in the situation of that? Is that not a weakness, or is that you think that's all okay if they follow the process, follow the issues?
So each one of these coppers is supervised by the line manager of that officer to make sure that they're completing what would be considered the basic checks. There is a reality to that, however, that this is operational policing and there are a number of competing demands on those officers. And I'd like to say to you that all of these things always end perfectly and we do a brilliant job every time, but that isn't the case. What I can say is the officers are working extremely hard. They have a checklist centrally and we're trained. So we're trying to increase that standard and improve that consistency on them. It's then checked by their line manager. It's checked by Pauline's team as it arrives. So we have several stages of check-in before we make a decision.
No one's trying to catch you out or pull the rug from underneath you and to be critical. We understand about the complexity and the pressures that you face. What we're trying to get to the bottom of is there a level of inconsistency? What can we do to improve that in terms of response across London, rather than have centres of excellence of some BCUs are taking? We heard earlier on about attitudinal aspects to these potential crimes. Do you know what I mean around that? So that's what I'm trying to get to.
I think if I come in, there's probably best. As we've said, that is it what we would like at this point in time? No. Is it getting better? Yes. And that is due to our commitments to Vision Zero, working with TfL as well. Part of that is that the advice that my teams now give if they're called out. We're looking to enhance our training, to put basically more enhanced officers that are trained to a better degree within the BCUs to address that exact point. What I can say is that every element of criminality, if there's criminality involved, that will be supervised by what we call an evidential review officer, that's a sergeant or a DS. That's a separate qualification, so they've got an additional element of training for supervising criminal investigations. So that's there, and to say, due to our commitments with Vision Zero, we have put new things in place because of that. So it isn't what we'd like, but it is getting better.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. My question is to you, Commander Gordon. But before I put my question to you, can I thank you for bringing the right officers with you that you felt would help us in this session? Thank you very much for your attendance. So, Commander, look, my question is about resourcing, or lack of it, to be more precise. So we talked about, you've been asked about vacancy rates by Assemblyman Pageant. You talked about right care, right person, creating the capacity we never had before. But can I, just to clarify, can I ask you very directly, are there any specific types of vehicular offences, car, trucks, etc., that you're forced to screen out because you simply don't have the staff or the resources?
No, so there's nothing in relation to specific crime types on the road that we would specifically screen out. The screening out, if I can use your phrase in the context to which you have given it, is simply starts off whenever the initial call comes in to the call handling centre, and we go through the process of what's colloquially known as Thrive. So it's assessed by the call handlers against threat, harm, risk. It is worth saying that it is not the job of the police to attend damage-only road traffic collisions per se. So unless there are other aggravating factors, we don't simply arrive at the scene for the purposes of gathering information for third parties, insurance companies, etc. There's very specific criteria around why we would investigate a road traffic collision. So that's the first element of screening out in terms of do we need to attend in the first place. When the officers then do attend, it may well turn out that offences that have been alleged, etc., might not actually be present. There might not be evidence of that. If somebody wanted to play the system, all they would simply have to do is allege an offence at the time that they report, and they would get a police response. So that might be the second level of screening out. And as Dan and Ross have mentioned, then there are further elements through, as you would with any potential crime. Have a look. Is there a crime? Is there crime evidence? Can we prosecute it along reasonable lines of inquiry? And then the case file would go through. To draw all of that back down again, though, there is no policy within the Metropolitan Police Service that says because of capacity issues we do not attend certain crime types on the road.
Thank you. So, I mean, obviously you can always do with more resources, but that's not putting you off from investigating.
No.
Yeah,
no, not at all.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
And could I say that all of those are investigated? Any injury on the road involving criminality is investigated.
Sure.
We do not screen anything out. First of all, it's all investigated.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. Thank you.
Sorry, could I just add in relation to my side of the business, so any injury collision would be subject to a secondary investigation. It's the damage only, the slight damage found that we haven't got capacity to deal with.
Yeah. And thank you for your attendance as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. And I just want to echo Assembly Member Desai's comments about the expertise of the team. It's very, very heartening to have you all here because you really do seem to know your beans, as they say. I want to start with Pauline, if I might. What has been the impact of the implementation of Connect, and what kind of effect has it had on the investigations that you carry out?
So Connect Drop 1 brought the functionality and it replaced for us copper case, so it's the case prep functionality. So any charges now go through Connect. So in relation to investigations, it hasn't impacted, and it's actually de-scoped for Drop 2, which is due next month, I think, February, so for investigation. So collision investigation, collision reporting, casualty reporting, de-scoped from Drop 2. So we're just waiting timescales as to when that will feature on the future roadmap. So Connect, for my team, any new system, so usability, so you've got that training, but because my team, so I deal with all of the traffic offence prosecutions in London, so not just from the collisions, from traffic offence reports, or the camera side of the business as well. So they're main users of the system.
Pauline, could I ask you to move your mic? That's better. Sorry. Fantastic. Sorry. Thank you. Sorry, the broadcasters just need to get it right.
Yeah, so they are main users of the system. So they're repeat users. So they're used to using the system. We've also got I can't say there haven't been some performance and technical issues. That happens with new systems. But we also have introduced lots of workarounds. So there's never been any compromise to charging as a result of Connect. And we've got third-party access, so if we need to, we can lay information direct to the court system. But no impact in relation to investigations at this stage.
Did you feel it's made any improvement, though? Do you feel like it will work better than the system it's replaced, or is that to be seen?
In time, I think it will, because you'll have the integration of the different elements of all policing systems. So we'll go from intelligence to investigations to prosecutions. So that sharing of information and intelligence. Will
it speed it up? Is that the goal there?
Yes, so in relation to that, they're the requirements, so it's delivering on those, then it should streamline the procedures.
Okay, thank you. Commander Gordon?
Yeah, I wonder if I could just maybe give some reassurance from a perspective of somebody that even though I am 6 years with the Met, I'm still considered a blow-in. So I come from forces that have all a similar system to connect, an end-to-end integrated system. The Metropolitan Police Service needed this system to go to the heart of your question. Once we get over the speed bump of getting officers and staff familiarised with the system and up to speed, it will absolutely improve what we do. I cannot tell you, as an outsider coming into the Met, how challenging our systems are in that they're all standalone. So you've got case prep, you've got custody, you've got investigation. The rest of the United Kingdom and the forces I have been in have had systems where that is all completely seamless, from the command and control system right the way through. You have asked, will it improve investigation? So to give one simple example, when a golden nominal is created on one of these systems and would be investigated for a road traffic collision, everything that they're wanted for, every other prosecution case that they have, every single notification of a wanted person that currently sits in separate systems will now all be in one place, and you could not complete that investigation without that being flagged to you and without it being taken into consideration by the investigating officer. I know I sound a little evangelical in this space, but this will really, not just in road traffic collisions, across the board, when officers and staff are familiar with it and we get it up to speed, this will absolutely make such a significant difference to what we do.
It sounds like on our committees across the various work the GLA does, one of the themes has always been siloing, and many, councils, the government, everybody's trying to get past siloing, and it looks like this might help. Let me come to my second question to you, Commander Gordon. Has the Met identified any gaps in training, and what plans do you have to fill those gaps if they exist?
Yeah, so thanks. It gives me an opportunity to talk about some of the really good work that Ross and his team are looking at. So in terms of specific gaps in training for road traffic collisions, there are no specific gaps. As I say, they get the initial training at Hendon, so every officer that comes through gets that. Pauline's team all have specific training, and anybody who goes on then to be a specialist in relation to collision investigation gets additional training. But I know there is work being done by Ross and his team to try and even enhance that further within the BCUs right across the Met.
Yes, as I sort of alluded to earlier, we're looking to enhance practitioners out there on the streets, because we know that there is a lack of knowledge out there, and my teams hold that specific knowledge, but elsewhere it is limited. So we're looking to set up basically 12, across 12 BCUs, we will have 12 enhanced supervisors that will get specific training with regards to investigation of road traffic collisions, and an additionality of 2 actual investigators each BCU. So there'll be 3 people, 1 supervisor, 2 practitioners on each BCU that are dealing with those ones we've discussed that fall outside of our remit and not into Pauline's one. So they will have that training, and we're looking at having a 2-year kind of rotation to upskill those, make sure we haven't had anyone drop off and fill those gaps. So it is something we are addressing.
So how advanced are you in achieving that? Do you have 6, or do you have 1? Do you have 11?
It's literally, I proposed it a couple of weeks ago, so we're right at the early stages, but it's something that we can roll out pretty quickly. Quite a lot of other forces have already done it. We're speaking to those. I've been speaking to Greater Manchester Police who already do it. They're really keen on it. They find it works quite well. So it's at its kind of final planning stages and ready to go to implementation.
What's your ambition? With a favourable wind, when would we have at least 1 officer in every BCU? Of your 12 that you've proposed?
For 12. Yeah. I'd say next year would be looking...
Okay, we won't hold you to that.
No.
I just want you to force yourself to have some kind of level of ambition to actually get it done. Let me just come to you with this next question, DC Morrell. How does the SCIU pass on good practice and other police to other police teams, including those who are first on the scene?
It comes back to that bit that I spoke to about earlier. That's brand new. This time last year, we didn't have it in place. So what used to happen is if our teams deployed, it'd be assessed. We'd say, look, it's not within our remit, and we'd leave. That no longer happens. We provide the officers with structured investigation plans. Those investigation plans, they go to the officers that are on scene, the duty officer that's controlling the scene, the actual inspector that's controlling the investigations, and the BCU commander. So they all get that, and it's clear advice, step-by-step investigation plan of what needs to be conducted.
So you're effectively leaving a piece of paper with a method,
Yes.
a plan to follow, as it were.
Yes.
Okay, that sounds more effective. I think that's it from me, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Bailey. Moving on to Assemblymember Hall.
Chair,
Thank you.
just before we do, and apologies, I do apologise. I wonder, is it worth also pointing out two other things that I should have mentioned on the way through, just around potential gaps, but these are forward-facing. So, and not specific to the Met, but to give you assurance that these things are being considered by Policing PLC across the UK. So we have in the last couple of months formed with a number of key partners, the Home Office, Department for Transport and others, a futures group looking at what is coming down the line, because of course you're asking us about the here and now, and that's right and proper, but in a very short space of time we will be investigating collisions that may have autonomous or semi-autonomous vehicles involved. So we have nationally, and that work does have people from the Met sitting on it, but will fall down into the Met, looking at what is coming down the line over the next 5, 10, 15 years in roads policing, and what might that mean for the victim and the families and the communities to whom the impact is felt. And the other piece of work that we are doing nationally as well, I've had several law firms, solicitors firms come into and ask us, is there anything they could do to help the ordinary frontline cops, the 9-5 cops, understand what it is that they might do when they're already at the scene, just to enhance what it is that they might do for the victims. So we are considering that nationally. We want to be sure, obviously, that it's appropriate and proper, that we would start to bring firms in to work with us around that. But there is potentially the offer of free training and free familiarisation around some key points. So we are exploring that, and if that does happen, that will fall down through Andy's world nationally, including the Metropolitan Police Service. So I thought it was worth just trying to give you some assurance around the fact we're not just trying to fix the here and now, we are continually trying to seek to improve.
I think that's correct, because if you continually just focus on here and now, you'll always have something to do. That mitigation piece, I think, needs to happen more across the services we provide as a country. Yeah, it's good to hear.
Do you mind if I just give one example of that? Thank you. Disclosure, so you mentioned earlier around, perhaps civil matters where victims are pursuing that aspect. So we've taken legal advice, we've consulted nationally, and we've delivered a new disclosure policy document, which has been shared nationally. I know it's been shared in the Met, and it essentially leans to early disclosure in civil matters, because so often crash victims, their families are waiting for the criminal investigation to finish before they can pursue a civil matter, and that really puts families in difficult circumstances, maybe where perhaps the breadwinner's been killed. So that early disclosure running simultaneously as a civil and criminal matter is really prioritising victims and putting them first.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. This is a very, very quick one. If I can ask you, Commander. I'm concerned about resourcing, because whenever you talk to different sections of the Met, they're so under-resourced with bums on seats, if you like. And you clearly are from what you were saying earlier. When was that structure put in place?
So the current structure that was put in place was put whenever the super BCUs were created, which was just prior to me arriving at the Met, so it must have been
2017.
Yeah.
So and it occurs to me, we went down to 29,000 frontline officers at one point, and we're now up to 34,500 frontline officers. And I'm just concerned that we weren't hearing constantly of all these departments being so short of staff, but we are now, when we've got so many more frontline officers, according to your own stats.
Yeah, so without turning this into a resourcing conversation, the world of policing is changing, the complexity is changing.
I understand.
A lot of the investigations that might have previously taken a certain amount of time, due to everything from reports by HMIC, FRS, the Director General's guidance, etc., all increases the amount of investigation time that is needed. And of course, we are seeing rising call volumes, etc., post-COVID. So
I completely understand that. I'm just trying to understand, have you added the positions within the department, which is why there's so many people missing? Is it exactly the same as it was to start with, which you're telling me it was? I am concerned about the resources for the Metropolitan Police in general, and I was just trying to understand where all these new police officers are going. That's my concern. But if you say it's been the same structure all this time, I'll take that on board.
So we've had the same overarching structure. That's not to say that within each of the BCUs, once they were set up, we have looked at various changes to the team to try and stay ahead of that. So apologies, I didn't mean to mislead in saying it has been static throughout. So we have looked at the best ways of doing investigations. Just to take one simple example, within the emergency response teams, we're on records, and others have talked about the number of officers that we have that are not deployable within the Metropolitan Police Service.
I know.
So we've created posts to try and enhance some of that. So we have sought to keep evolving.
So you have created posts. That's all I'm trying to find out, because if one constantly creates more posts and say we're 20 officers short, and then those are filled, and then more posts are created. Do you see my point? I'm just, in general, I worry that we're not financing the Met properly. That is my biggest concern. And I'm trying to get in my head whether more posts are being created, which is making it our department is X amount of people short, or what is happening, bearing in mind the numbers of police officers are going up and up.
So I think it's a number of things. I think because of certain changes in investigative requirement, posts have been created in some teams, but I also think that we have moved people within teams to focus on doing the same job a different way. We've had a changing landscape in terms of demand, pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID, all of those things. It would be wrong for me to suggest that there's simply one thing that has led to why these posts we're saying we're under. It isn't a case, however, and at this point I do need to be clear on it, isn't a case of we've simply said that team, we're going to create a number of posts and therefore they're vacant. We have sought to try and match demand with capability and capacity across a number of functions, and that has led to it. It's a very complex piece of work, as you might imagine, but that has led to
I understand it's been a complex answer. I'm not as clear as I should be, but I'll go away and do some more homework. Thank you.
Apologies. If I can help on the outside of this meeting, I'm more than happy to.
Thank you. Assemblymember Devonish is now going to move us on to questions about the scene management and initial investigation.
Good morning. Thank you very much for all of you for coming. I think this has been slightly covered, but I think they are different questions. So to Commander Gordon and Superintendent Card, how does the Met minimise the risk of error when recording the severity of injuries at a collision?
So that's a good point, and it is always a challenge because our officers aren't medical experts. So we are always at the scene led by what the other emergency services or the doctors tell us. As Mr. Morrell said earlier, sometimes we find a situation where we will go to an incident and treat it in one way, and then somebody decides to go to the hospital later that day because they're not feeling unwell and find out they've actually got significantly worse injuries than we thought. On the side of the road, a cop wouldn't have access to all that advanced medical equipment to be able to diagnose that. So that is an ongoing challenge in terms of how we do it. But that's why we always work really closely with our partners in the NHS to try and establish that wherever possible. And if in any doubt, we would potentially hold a scene for a number of hours to allow us to get updated medical information so we can make an informed decision based on the facts.
Sure. Nothing to add? No, yeah, I think that's very thorough. What training and guidance is provided to borough officers to ensure they understand and thoroughly record what they are looking for at the scene of a collision, please?
So the initial recruit training that they get at training school is almost 8 hours worth over a number of weeks and different stages. That's a combination of in-person learning in lectures, practice sort of role play type events, and then online learning after that. To support that, and in addition to that, there is it's called an investigation of road traffic collisions frontline checklist, and all officers that report collisions have access to that via our internal intranet, and that is exactly what it says, a checklist of have you done X, have you done Y. That's the first level to support those officers in reporting that. What follows that then is, once that goes onto copper, it's then supervised by their line manager, and then there's a QA process when it goes into MO10 at a later date, if it goes that way. Or there's a local ERO that will make that decision if someone's arrested at the scene.
Great, thank you. And to Pauline, how would you describe the quality of evidence being passed to MO10 by borough officers, please, and what works well in your view, and where are improvements needed?
So there are sometimes gaps. It's complex on-scene management. So we have identified on occasion where we've got witness details missing. So my case managers will look at body-worn video evidence to ensure that the details that are on the copper record match what the officers at scene have recorded. If there are gaps, they will task the OIC. We also look to see what checks were made regarding CCTV. There are, on the copper record, there should be indication of what on-scene investigations regarding that were made. If it says no CCTV, we will just do supplementary checks just to make sure. If there is learning, then we pass that back to the OIC as well. So for us, having the ability to look at body-worn video evidence has bridged some of that gap. Where we see themes, then we pass that through the CJ spots at BCUs to say, like, learning for future. If we identify those themes with specific boroughs, then we'll target inform their SLT. We're also looking at going out to BCUs to talk to frontline officers about some of the issues that we experience, just to improve standards as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm just about to bring in Assembly Member Moama, but could I just ask, could we see the frontline checklist that gets handed out to the people who are turning up at the scene? That would be really helpful to understand exactly what people are looking for. Thank you. Assembly Member Moama.
Thanks. Just to follow up, Dan, you said in response to Tony that the training is about 8 hours over a period of time and then it moves to online. Is that the sum total of training that officers will have to be able to investigate?
I can give you the breakdown of where we are. So they get 120 minutes input, which is classroom based, on attending non-crime incidents, of which collisions are one of those. They then get 240 minutes of lectures around that, where they need to demonstrate competency in application of operational policing to live incidents. After that, they get a 30-minute e-learning task where they need to do a couple of interactive exercises on a system, followed by another 25 minutes on vehicle offences, 22 minutes on driving offences, 21 minutes on vehicle offences, 12 minutes just to top up on road traffic collisions, followed by 20 minutes on driving under the influence of drink and drugs.
Okay. It sounds, I was a comment rather than a question, but it sounds quite light touch.
Can I come in just from the
yeah.
Obviously, sorry to interrupt, Dan, from the fatal crash, and obviously the life-changing injuries are detective-based. So to put into context, to be a detective, you have to pass a national examination. You then go through a detective course. So essentially, we're training serious collision investigators as any other detective. So the whole detective training program is extensive. So we're talking weeks and weeks and weeks, and examinations that have to be passed, accreditations that have to be kept, continuous professional development every year in that role. So for the fatal and life-changing serious end of obviously collision investigation, the training is completely different to what Dan's just articulated. You're obviously talking about the borough officers.
Yeah, I'm just talking about initial recruit training. Obviously, the more serious the offence, the more experienced officer goes, and the higher level of training that would go with it.
It is also worth pointing out, of course, Dan has given you, and I have the same readout, exactly what we allocate under a specific heading. But officers are not trained in isolation, so when they are taught scene management to do with a rape, a domestic incident, a serious assault, that's building on the training that they will get about scene management of a road traffic collision. When they're taught investigative techniques around all of these elements, that is enhancing their investigative capability. So I think it may be slightly erroneous to look at this, albeit I understand your concern, but it may be slightly erroneous to think that in a 5 or 6 month training window, we take somebody, a member of the public, turn them into a police officer, and it's only what they get in relation to this that would enhance their capabilities in relation to the care and the service that we provide to Londoners at road traffic collisions. It's all built upon each other, and actually, whilst we have specifically asked for that to be pulled out because we thought we may be asked it, investigation is investigation is investigation, and as officers learn the whole way through their training cycle to come out the other end, everything that's applicable to the panoply of investigations will also enhance this. And of course, one of the things that they get is tutoring whenever they come out. So a probationary officer coming out gets a tutor. So when they attend road traffic collisions, that tutor will enhance and build upon the learning that they get. The investigation then goes through the sergeant and Pauline's team, who will give feedback in terms of the investigation. So there's an iterative learning cycle around all of that. So I'm not trying to gild the lily, but I do think it is an important distinction to make, that rather than simply say here's a very narrow window of what they get and that is the only thing that they get that enhances this, the investigation and scene management and the victim care that they would get for all offences can all come to bear on any incident such as this.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just literally, that is the actual important bit that we need to move away from isolation in investigation across the board and investigate as any other crime type. So.
Thank you. Assembly Member Prince, quite a lot of the bits of your questions have been covered, so if you're able to speed up, that would be amazing. And I think if we can keep answers tight as well, because we're slightly up against the clock.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm aware of that. So we have heard, and you've given us some assurance around training and providing a specialist into each BCU. But also we've heard from Pauline that there are gaps in information when there's an attendance at scene. You've got your checklist now. If I can ask Dan, but obviously Commander Gordon, you're welcome to chip in. When do you think, leaving aside human error, of course, we can get to a situation where these gaps will no longer exist? Do we have a timeline for that? Do you have a target or an aspiration?
So I think I'll start by saying that is 100% our aspiration. You know, we want to deliver the best quality response we can, but the reality is almost all of these are human error. You know, there are people under pressure trying to deliver a difficult service, and I can't give you a guarantee that there will never be human error in any of the policing processes, because it's human based. But hopefully the checks and balances we've got, the additional training, the stuff that Ross is working on, our close links with Pauline's team will over time improve that situation.
But you don't have a target?
Well, no, our target is as soon as possible and as best as we can, and that's always going to be for how we want to deliver policing for London. But we don't have a roadmap set out in terms of dates.
All right, thank you. I'm happy with that answer. Can you also, in Paris, when there's a road or a road traffic collision, all the authorities have 30 minutes in order to wash up and get Paris moving again? Clearly we don't have that in London. Could I have, it's probably Commander Gordon, could I have your view on that? I mean, how much more information do we get in that extra 30 minutes, an hour, or whatever it is that the road's closed for, sometimes for half a day, compared to the inconvenience that it causes Londoners?
Yeah, so it's interesting because we've looked at this nationally as well, and of course if you take British Transport Police, they have very set times around when they clear a railway track for exactly the same reasons. And there's a balance to be struck between the expediency of opening a road and getting business back to usual. And of course, if we brought that in and had an arbitrary time limit around it, I wager we would be back in front of this panel in a couple of years' time explaining why we're not investigating things that we may have investigated or evidence that was left aside. On the other side, we know we can't keep it open forever, and I'll bring Dan in around some of the work we've done in that space. But we don't, in the United Kingdom, give an arbitrary time around any of these things. Should it be closing a scene for a sexual offence, a rape, a homicide? We don't, because it's led by the investigation, and by that very nature we allow the autonomy of the officers with suitable checks and balances to ensure that they do a thorough job at the scene. Dan?
Yeah, and just to give some assurances, so when we deal with those fatal and very serious injury collisions, we do a scene reconstruction, and there's a very small number of people that do those, and we have really invested in kit and equipment for them. So they now have 3D laser scanners, where before it was done with tape measure and took a lot of time. Now they can do it much more swiftly and effectively. So we are aware of the impact it has on road closures, but for me, I think it's the victims of these tragic circumstances that we need to focus on rather than an arbitrary time limit.
Yeah, aside of fatals, but in the other instances, would it not be more expedient to get the traffic moving?
We always try to open a road as swiftly as we can, but it's that balance between doing a good service to somebody and sweeping it up, because you start sweeping up roads too early, you lose crucial pieces of evidence on that, and that's the key thing we're keen to not do.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm now going to bring in Assemblymember Ahmed, who is online. Marina, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and can I apologise for the appalling problems that I'm having with the internet at home today. Hope you can hear me. I want to start off asking questions about victims, the accountability and transparency of the service that is being offered. So, to start with Kyle and Pauline, what policies, processes and guidance does the Met have in place to assure the quality of serious injury investigations?
So in relation to the investigations, we've got standard operating procedures that are administered. In relation to victim care, then we operate within VCOP, so updates every 28 days. We have recognise that there's gaps in understanding victim satisfaction. So as part of the victim programme board, we are looking at post-charge surveys going out to victims. That's just looking at it holistically. They were leading on crime, and I've said that we can extend that for road traffic collisions as well. So that's something that we're looking into. And we also work with the Vision Zero Advisory Group, understanding accounts from the victims and seeing where there are gaps and how we can bridge those.
Thank you. And Kyle?
So for expediency, I let Pauline cover that. I'm not going to add much more to it. We are aware that there are gaps. One of the challenges we face is, of course, with the volume coming through in a very young, inexperienced workforce, predominantly on frontline emergency response teams. It is a constant battle of education and enhancement. We are looking at better ways of ensuring that the emergency response teams and investigations they pick up do provide a better victim service. But as Pauline says, the Victims Programme Board is the main governance checks and balances that we have, and we continually seek to try and comply with the Victims Code of Practice.
Thank you. My next question is for Andy. Andy, do you think Londoners have confidence in the Met's investigation of serious injury collisions, and how can that confidence be improved?
I can't answer the confidence issue, but what I can say is, in terms of do I have confidence, yes. We have a National Collision Investigator of the Year award. We've only started it in 2022. The Met have won it. They set the standard. When we talk through resourcing numbers for collision investigation in the Met, and I'm talking here about fatal and life-changing injuries, they are so significant. Every single member of my collision board rolls its eyes, to be frank, around the amount of capacity the Met has to investigate. And the fatal rates are not disproportionately different to elsewhere in the country, actually. So the resourcing levels are significantly enhanced. The expertise is significantly enhanced as well. We have, the skills, the capacity, the training in place at that top end of collision investigation. So we have all the family liaison officers. We have a real drive and energy. And then when we look at the wider Roads and Transport Command and what that offers as well, is so significantly different to elsewhere in the country. So when I chair the National Board reporting into Kyle, the confidence levels I have are very, 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 very significant in terms of what the Met can offer.
Thank you. And my final question is, how is it how easy is it for victims to acquire, or victims and their families to acquire information from the Met following a collision, and how can this process be improved? And could I start with Dan, please?
I'll probably pass you over to Pauline, because most of these conversations that you're having here will come as a result of insurance companies and stuff, and that's where it goes to that secondary investigation piece. So at the scene, officers would try and facilitate the exchange of documents between parties involved in the collision, but subsequent to that, that would be done through Met Prosecutions.
Okay, thank you.
So you're inquiring regarding this secondary investigation and updates from police if victims make contact? So if you, well, it really is the process, full stop. What, how easy is it for victims to acquire the information that they need? So and obviously it's not just victims, it's their families as well, if sadly a victim has died. And, you know, just throughout the whole process, how easy is it for them to get that information? So in relation to contact, any injured party will be contacted within 48 hours by my case managers. They're provided details of who is undertaking their secondary investigation, who to contact. So there's that line in if they've got any queries. And then there's the obligations under Victim Code of Practice to update regarding the investigation every 28 days. If there's information regarding to satisfy any civil litigation, then we will facilitate that and ensure early disclosure to assist in that respect.
Is there anything in that process that you think could be improved?
Sorry, I think Dan wanted to come in around the fatals.
Yeah, go on.
Sorry, if I come in there and talk about the fatals, is that every single criminal investigation involving a fatal collision, is that family is allocated a family liaison officer. It's a dedicated officer, specially trained to engage with the family. Moving forward and those improvements, we're currently running a trial of a new process that's co-funded between MOPAC and TfL, where in addition to the allocation of a flow, the family will be allocated, in essence, a dedicated support worker, similar to what happens to rape victims and domestic violence victims. And they can assist with things such as finances, funeral arrangements, counselling, all those added extras that come with a fatal collision.
Okay, right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we're on to final question. There was a new pilot victim support service announced in September 2023 to improve the Met support to victims of the most serious road traffic collisions in London. So I'd just like to ask really how that's going and where you see it going to as well. I don't know who wants to.
Yes,
jump
no,
in on
that was. I'll take that, and that was what I was just talking about there. It is a fantastic. It's the only one of its kind. We've had 21 qualifying investigations, and 9 people have been referred on. We anticipate that to get more, but obviously, what happens at time of a fatal collision is a really, really complex emotional time for families. So the information's passed on, and then the flow literally will go back and re-ask at a later date, more suitable when families have gone through that initial crisis moment. So yeah, we're quite confident. It is really good. I'm really pleased with it.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything on that? No. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for all of you coming. It has been really informative and I think particularly powerful to hear you talking about the investigation of road crime in the same breath as you talk about the investigation of murders and other serious crimes. And hearing you sort of put that emphasis on you know, we've just seen the case of Gao Gao, which has just been going through the courts, and the impact on the family of someone who is killed in something like a hit-and-run collision, which that was, where the person doesn't have the decency to stop and find out how the victim is doing and whether they're safe and whether they need help. You know, actually putting the work in to try and address these crimes and bring them right down is just so important. So thank you for everything that you have shared with us. And the only thing we've asked you for is the information that officers get when they turn up at the scene, the guidance for which we would very much like to see. So thank you to the guests for attending this morning, your answers to our questions. We are now going to adjourn the meeting while we change panels. And if we could get a quick So welcome back to the Police and Crime Committee meeting. We now move on to the question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime. And can I welcome Sophie Linden, Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, and Judith Mullett, who is Head of MPS Oversight, Workforce and Professionalism for MOPAC. So welcome to you both. Now, before we move into our questions, we noticed that the National Police Chiefs Council made an announcement yesterday about their sort of big data wash that they'd done, and I just wondered if you had any comments you wanted to make in relation to that.
I think it's welcome that the NPCC have shown what's happened nationally around that data wash, and it's a data wash of the police national database, which is about police intelligence. And of course, the Met was one of the first forces to do this, and has been, leading the way in terms of this is really about making sure that the right people are in policing. And the Met were, as I said, one of the first forces to do this. I'm sure you've seen the figures around what has been found within the Metropolitan Police: 58 disciplinary investigations, 17 people subject to ongoing gross misconduct investigations, and there's some misconduct proceedings below that as well. And a couple of people have been referred into Operation Assure, which is the Met's process of reviewing the vetting of officers. I think what it shows is that the issue in the Met is a national policing issue, and that's why the NPCC has taken it so seriously, and it's very good that nationally policing are getting their house in order.
Thank you very much. So I'm now going to bring in Assembly Member Moema, who's going to start our questions.
Thank you. So to you, Sophie, overall, how content are you with the progress made by the Commissioner in the past year in response to the KC Review's findings on misconduct and grievances?
I think the Commissioner has absolutely gripped the issue of misconduct and standards and values within the Metropolitan Police from day one of his commissionership. He's seen that as one of his, absolute priorities, to make sure that he is able to be able to look Londoners in the eye and say, I know that the right people are within the Metropolitan Police. I think there has been substantial progress, real substantial progress in putting the processes in place to really look at who is within the Met. The operation that the NPCC reported on that we've just discussed is one of those things around the data wash of the Met. He quickly set up a line for members of the public to phone in and to report any issues with Metropolitan Police officers, leading the country again in that way. That's something that's been taken up nationally and is going to be a national line if it's not already. I have to double check, but it's it has been taken up nationally. Crime Stoppers, of course, managing that line for the Metropolitan Police. It's not just about processes and systems and grip. The Commissioner was incredibly clear, and has been incredibly clear about what standards he expects of officers. He has been really clear what he thinks is gross misconduct. Really clear that anybody that is is discriminatory, racist, sexist, misogynist, it has no place within the Metropolitan Police. And really trying to encourage people to come forward to if they come across colleagues that are like that. But it's, as I said, it's not just about the standards and processes. In the Commissioner's report to the first meeting of the London Policing Board, he was able to report, good progress in terms of really rooting out officers. There'd been a 32% increase in conduct matters being recorded, 21% increase in the number of investigations completed, and 183 officers had been suspended, which was up from 69 in September 2022, which is a 165% increase. I mean, these types of figures show you the seriousness in which it's been gripped within the Metropolitan Police. And they are also, one of the things that came out of the inspectorate report into the Daniel Morgan case is that they Met were being criticised in terms of proactivity and not enough proactivity, but they've also doubled the number of proactive arrests which are undertaken by their Anti-Corruption and Abuse Command. So I think there's been a lot of progress. Clearly, there's a lot more to do because this takes time. It takes time for conduct cases to come through, but it also takes time for the culture of the Metropolitan Police to change.
Thank you for that. And Judith, it's nice to meet you. You may have a view on this next question. but it's for both of you. So can you provide an example of where good progress has been made and where you believe more work is needed?
Well, I think as Sophie has outlined, there is significant progress that has been made. I'm really pleased to see the amount of resources, particularly that the Commissioner has put into Directorate of Professional Standards, because again, it's that demonstrates how important it is to investigate these matters really thoroughly. We know colleagues within the Metropolitan Police had some concerns about coming forward, and actually to be able to see that robust action in being taken, I think is really positive. We have seen improvements in a number of areas. It is a complex world. It does take time for some of these things to come to fruition, but we are seeing, for example, many more misconduct hearings, so cases that are actually coming to a hearing, and then when at hearing, actually officers being dismissed. And you'll see again the transparency in terms of the Met actually publishing that detail much more about where officers have been dismissed. So I think that's a real step forward, so actually the public can see that is happening.
So I take your point that the number of people suspended has gone up quite substantially, and that is positive, although that's from a very low base, given the numbers of staff and officers that there are there. So do you find it credible that the job is being done fast enough, or it is done, I suppose? And just what the status of any backlog in cases might be in terms of misconduct proceedings, just how many there are left to go?
In terms of cases that are coming through the system and then reach a hearing point and then actually getting on, I mean, as I've said, we know that the misconduct process does take too long. That doesn't serve any purpose well. It doesn't serve the confidence of the public, any victim or complainant that may be involved, or the officer themselves. And equally, it doesn't serve the public purse well, because the officer is, certainly if they're suspended, then they're on full pay. And sometimes that's for, a year, 2 years, quite easily.
And against the backdrop of black and Asian officers being 80% more likely to be disciplined, and Baroness Casey did say that she kind of surmised that there would be unfairness around disability and sexuality, but the data is very poor. How is that side of the review's findings around disproportionality in the way that officers and staff are disciplined? How is that working, and how is that feeding through into the number of people that are then being kind of removed for gross misconduct?
I mean, it is a consequence that if more black and Asian minority ethnic officers are referred into the misconduct system, then inevitably there will be more that are disciplined. It's just by the nature of maths. Is that an issue in terms of the awareness of the disproportionality? Yes, that has been a long-running issue. I'm sure you'll be aware, MOPAC Evidence and Insight Unit have done some significant analysis and research looking at that disproportionality, trying to understand and help and support the Met, understand what are the drivers for that, and then working alongside them in terms of actually saying how it is obviously for the Met to address. It goes to the wider culture issue for me, because as I said, this is referrals into the process itself. So that that is a difficult issue to tackle, but actually it's one that the Met are focusing on. We do think there has been some improvements in that referral rate. It is coming down slightly, but there is clearly a lot more to do, and that's something we're tracking. And I can say, I'm sure you're aware, the first People and Culture Committee from within the London Policing Board, that disproportionality and misconduct is a key agenda item at that first meeting. because that is an area that certainly London Policing Board members, and including ourselves, are very concerned about. We know there's more work that needs to be done there.
Yeah, no, I guess the point that I'm trying to get at is that surely you will have officers that remain in the system that should be going through that process, but because they haven't been flagged in the first place, how confident are you that you will then go back and find them and remove them from the force?
So I think one of the things that's just to go back to, I'll come back to that, but just go back to your question about the backlogs. There's been a 32% increase in cases going into the system in the 12 months to October 2023. So you've actually got a higher volume of cases coming in. So that backlog, what could be called a backlog is actually increase of cases coming in. But timeliness is beginning to improve, which is also, coming back to your first question about has there been progress, basically, what impact has the Commissioner had since Casey, since starting and also since the publication of the case review. Actually, it's got still, again, long way to go, but actually the average it's a rolling 12-month average for finalising cases. It used to be about 148 days in December 22. It's now 130 days. Clearly, that's a small drop, but it shows progress, especially given the volume coming in. Your question about our, confidence of making sure that everybody who should be coming to notice is coming to notice, and then also about disproportionality. Of course, that's work in progress about that. That is about giving, and that's what Casey was really clear about in her report, wasn't it? Is that you have to give people confidence to come forward to complain. And she had case studies in her in Chapter 7 about cases of officers coming and staff coming forward to complain where nothing was done. So why would you come forward to complain? So you have to give confidence for that to do that, and it does take time for that to improve. And actually, I hope the outcome of some of the disciplinary proceedings that have happened, the fact that complaints are being gone through more quickly, suspensions are improving, I hope that starts to give confidence to officers and staff to come forward. But she also talked about there being, and you've touched on this, she also talked about there being an issue. Clearly, you can surmise that what you see for race and gender is going to be the same for disability and sexual orientation. But the data isn't there at the moment, and we've discussed before at this committee about the issue about capture of data of the demographic background of people, whether it's reporting crime or internally within the Met, and that's clearly something that we've got to work with the Metropolitan Police about. So that, one, you know what is happening, and two, you can improve the confidence because you are able to show that something does happen.
Okay. So thank you for that. So you've kind of touched on my next question, or begun to answer it, which was around what evidence there is that the work on misconduct and grievances is improving trust and confidence in the police. If you can give us any examples of that, further examples.
I think, again, that's something that we are tracking through the public attitude survey in terms of overall trust and confidence in the police. We haven't got, as far as I'm aware, specific questions which is about can you, having seen what's happening about misconduct within the Metropolitan Police, has it improved your trust and confidence? Perhaps it's something we should look at to see how what we ought to be doing, need to be doing about that. However, we have seen, and I'm not saying there's a causation, there's a causal link to this, but since about October, I think in September of last year, we're beginning to see a stabilisation of trust and confidence in the Met. It's about 51% at the moment, so that is stabilising. However, that will be due to a number of different factors. So we've got more work to do on understanding that causal link.
And then my final question, perhaps Judith, in your role, do you feel that there is any evidence that trust in the internal grievance procedure has improved? I know that people had concerns that if they made a complaint that the odds were stacked against any, if you like, meaningful action for staff and officers.
I'd say the first thing I would say is that I know that internal reporting, be that by the Met's own mechanisms of reporting online anonymously, or as you say through Crime Stoppers, that's increased. So again, it's a good sign that more officers and staff are feeling able to come forward. In terms of grievances, we are getting better data on that. As you'll know, that was something that Baroness Casey pointed to, that actually the data wasn't great. But we are now getting better data than that. So I hope that that we will be able to have some kind of greater oversight of that, and then understand what staff feel about that. I think, you know, staff surveys are obviously a good opportunity to kind of look at that and measure that to see whether or not they feel more confident.
Thank you. Briefly, Assembly Member Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. You made a comment earlier on that black and Asian officers, by the very nature that they're more likely to be referred, you're more likely to find many of them being censured. That means that the process is flawed somewhere along the line, because if you're referred and you're innocent, hopefully the process would find that you're innocent, and if you're referred and you're found guilty, that means you probably were up to something. So is disproportionality real, or is the system flawed? Because as a black man, that is very distressing to me, because it looks like we're saying the win isn't just being referred. You know, if you just refer, that's it. Everybody assumes you're going to be found guilty. So are you confident in the system that you're using to assess if officers have misbehaved or not? Because your comments make me feel nervous.
Apologies for making you feel nervous. That certainly wasn't my intention. I think essentially what I'm saying is I believe the process itself is fair, but if you put more in, more will come out the other end. But is there appropriate checks and balance at that entry point? Yes, there is. So they are checking to say, does this referral meet the level of conduct or misconduct? Yes, it does. So it's going into the system. So everybody that is referred into the system meets the threshold for conduct. But are there too many or not enough being referred in, depending on the ethnicity of the officer, then possibly. And that's the area for me that
now I feel even more nervous, because that's irrelevant. If you say the process works, the referral process works, then there is no disproportionality, because then you're referring people who should be referred.
Apologies, Member Bailey. I didn't say that the referral process works. I think there are concerns about the referral process into the system.
Right.
What I'm saying is, once they're in the system, the process of assessing, is it conduct, then either doing an investigation or saying there's nothing here, but through doing an investigation, going through then to potentially either a misconduct meeting or misconduct hearing. That, I believe that process is fair. We are not seeing any additional disproportionality in that process. But my concern is, and it's a concern shared by all those who've looked at the data, is the referral process in.
Okay.
Can I just sort of, if in Chapter 7 of Baroness Casey's report, and also in the reports that MOPAC has published, the issue is about the over-representation of black and minority ethnic officers being referred into the system because they are being held to a different standard than white officers. And that's the issue. It's about when there is a misconduct allegation or there's an issue about misconduct, what has been found is that often a white officer will be dealt with informally, but a black officer will be immediately referred into the system. So there's a disproportionality in that the actual referral, not in the main system itself. Now, Baroness Casey really poses the question, as has the Commissioner and the Deputy Commissioner, around, well, where is the right standard? What is actually, what is happening? And the answer to that seems to be that white officers are not held to the same standard as black officers, so they are referred in. Baroness Casey also talks about the informal resolution of complaints and misconduct for white officers, and black officers being referred in because of managers being worried about being seen to be racist, not being able to actually deal with the referrals, deal with the conduct themselves, and that being one of the issues that about the referral into the system.
Okay, thank you. That's made me feel slightly less nervous.
Well, I'm very glad you're feeling a bit less nervous. Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. I'm not feeling nervous at all about anything. Deputy Mayor, you did mention trust and confidence being down to 51%. So if I can just pick up on that, do you think that is what is affecting recruitment?
There are a number of factors that are affecting recruitment and affecting recruitment right across the public sector in London. There, we know that most of the public sector is struggling to find people to apply and find the right quality to appoint. The labour market is one of the factors. I am sure the issues around the Metropolitan Police will have been a factor, but it is not the only factor.
No, I know that. I was just asking if this was one of them. How many officers are actually on suspension at the moment?
Yeah, I do. As of the end of December, I believe it was 206.
206, okay, thank you. And Judith, misconduct cases have always taken far too long. So did MOPAC highlight this, or have they been highlighting this for the last few years?
It is actually, yes, we have. It has, timeliness of investigations has been a concern for a number of years, and it is an issue that we have raised with the Metropolitan Police, and clearly we have also worked very hard to suggest that the system needs reforming, because part of that is obviously the regulatory system itself. It's very complex, and we've done lots of work, and clearly you'll be aware that the Mayor has worked particularly hard with Right Honourable Harriet Harman MP to actually push through some reforms to the government to say, let's speed up this process, because it doesn't work for anybody.
So where would I go to for evidence that MOPAC have been flagging this heavily for the last few years, good few years?
DARA have certainly done some Directorate of Audit and Risk and Assurance have done some reports looking at the way that the MPS manage misconduct. Concerns were certainly identified around the IT system that's used, the kind of the quality of the investigators, and therefore their ability to actually be able to pursue these investigations at pace. So
okay, you obviously know where they are. So would it be possible for you to send the committee a list of evidence, if you like, that MOPAC have been raising this? Because I know I've been mentioning it for quite some time, and police officers have been bringing it to my attention for very many years. Okay, thank you. So if I can go back to the Deputy Mayor. Outside the London Policing Board, what work is MOPAC doing to provide strategic oversight of misconduct and grievances in the Met?
So you're right. The London Policing Board is looking at this. The first meeting had this on the agenda. The Committee of People and Culture has got misconduct on the agenda for February the 12th, I think it is. Outside of the board, we have our usual mechanisms of oversight around the work of evidence and insight, and the looking at what is happening. That we've discussed some of the reports that Evidence and Insight have published. I have regular meetings with the Assistant Commissioner, Barbara Gray, who heads up professional standards, to discuss with her the issues. Judith, as head of oversight, sits on a number of boards and works with a number of teams within the Metropolitan Police in terms of that regular oversight in terms of misconduct. So the usual way in which we do oversight is the way that outside of the London Policing Board we are doing oversight on these matters. We also publish a quarterly performance report which has the performance figures in it. So we have that regular drumbeat of oversight there as well. I don't know if Judith, you want to add any of how you undertake your oversight.
Very happy to. I certainly have a monthly meeting with the commander in charge of the Director of Professional Standards, and we go through a rather comprehensive performance pack that actually, we look at each element, whether that be complaints or conduct matters, investigations, how they're progressing. Obviously, we're looking at data at a Met level, so we're not looking at personal data of individual officers who are being investigated, but very much that kind of Met data level, and also differences between how the DATO unit, which again you'll be aware of, that Baroness Casey pulled out, how their investigations are progressing, but equally looking at areas like the discrimination unit and other specialist teams, just to see how performance is progressing. We also sit on a number of internal boards that the Met run to progress areas such as transformation of the professional standards model and how that's changing. Again, you'll be aware Baroness Casey talked about the relationship between the local professional standards units and then the actual sort of centre, the Director of Professional Standards, and the relationship between those. And that's an area again that we've been pushing for change, and then that is, you know, a new model that the Met are coming in to be able to address that. So there is plenty of opportunities to engage and ask questions.
So has MOPAC changed drastically with the way it oversees this particular subject since the Casey report? Have you made changes?
So we are, as we've discussed before, I mean, we've discussed at Budget and Performance Committee and here, we, you know, in terms of the Casey report, we, of course, thought about, well, what does this mean for MOPAC? And yes, we have looked at the capacity within MOPAC for oversight, and this is part of the area that we have increased capacity, including the complaints team that Judith oversees as well, manages as well. So yes, we have looked at that in terms of capacity and in terms of prioritisation. I also should have mentioned before, of course, we discussed this with the Metropolitan Police leadership and those that are leading the teams on misconduct, but I also discussed it with the staff support associations and the unions within the Met to get that, which is what really the Casey review does as well, isn't it? Is to get there's policy and process, and then there's performance, but there's also understanding what those who are actually experiencing what is happening in the Met, what they are feeling.
Okay, thank you, Judith. How many extra members of staff have you got in your department then?
So as a result, as Deputy Mayor has explained in terms of the size, I got 2 extra members of staff that will be specifically focused on oversight of professional standards and workforce. I've also got, as the Deputy Mayor explained, quite a significant investment within our complaints reviews process. Again, I think you'll probably be aware there was a change of responsibility back in 2020 when Police and Crime Commissioners had responsibility for reviews of complaints. So I now have 10 people who work specifically on reviews, and as part of that, obviously, they will feed back into our oversight function what they're seeing in those reviews from a public complaint about the Metropolitan Police. If there's a review, then they then opt for a review because they don't like the outcome. My team will then be able to sort of look at those reviews and see the themes that are coming out, and we can feed that into our oversight to help understand and improve ultimately the service that the Met are providing to the public.
That's good news. Sophie, on that note then, how much extra money has gone into MOPAC since the Casey review because of the Casey review?
I'd have to get back to you on those figures because I haven't looked at that in terms of for this committee. I should also say that whilst obviously Judith and her team are incredibly important in the oversight of the Metropolitan Police, we have also increasing, as you know, we're increasing the capacity of evidence and insight to be able to do that analysis and data collection, which is about oversight. And we're also, one of the things that we've been clear about for the whole of MOPAC for a while now, is that oversight is not just about the team that Judith heads up. It is oversight is about the whole of MOPAC. So
I know that.
No, but I think
but Judith is here, which is why I was specifically. And if you're in charge of MOPAC, I would just like you to let me. You tell us to move on, Chair. I'm specifically asking about this, and it is perfectly acceptable for me to ask how much extra resource has gone into MOPAC since the Casey review. It's quite a simple question.
No, I completely agree. It's a very reasonable question. But,
that's
the Deputy Mayor does need to have a chance to reply.
Well, the Deputy Mayor said she doesn't know, so really I could leave it there and ask that we have informed on how much that would be.
But what I was wanting to put to you, Assembly Member Hall, is that of course there's the issue of Judith's team, but for example the Violence Against Women and Girls team in MOPAC does quite considerable oversight around the Metropolitan Police, including working with Judith's team around Project Onyx, which is really about misconduct. So whilst we're looking at Judith's team, and of course I can give you the figures for that, it is the whole of MOPAC that undertakes oversight of the Met.
Yeah, no, I get that. We all get that. I don't know whether the London Policing Board would, but in specific ways, will the London Policing Board People and Culture Committee enhance and support MOPAC's oversight and challenge of misconduct and grievances in the Met? Can you give some examples?
Well, the London Policing Board, as I've said, on its first meeting, had a report from the Commissioner around culture because it's such an important issue. February the 12th is the first committee meeting of the People and Culture Board. Misconduct is on the agenda, and it is also looking at disproportionality within misconduct. The individual members of the London Policing Board, some of them bring quite a lot of expertise around culture change, around discrimination as well. So yes, they will bring in quite a lot of support, and we will take forward work from there in terms of what else they ought to be, they will be doing with the Met around oversight, but also support and challenge to make sure that the progress is as fast as it can be.
Because it's an important issue. Yeah. But it's due to meet, it's got here at least biannually.
So the London Policing Board meets quarterly. The People and Culture Board will meet 2 or 3 times a year, publicly as a formal committee, because members of the board wanted to have the time in order to be able to do deep dives and visits into the Met and have those discussions more informally with the Met. So it's not that the People and Culture Board is not going to be working outside of the formal committee meetings. It's a different way of working, because we listened to what Baroness Casey said, and she came to the Police and Crime Committee to say, you really need to think about MOPAC not doing everything in exactly the same way. And that's one of the questions you've asked me as well, as you did before. How do you make sure you get maximum value out of the London Policing Board members? We discussed that with the London Policing Board members, and they wanted to have more flexibility rather than being sort of straitjacketed into a committee structure.
Yes, I equally know that people value transparency, and obviously if it's not met in public, what does that do for a mayor who says it's the most transparent mayor in the history of the world ever?
And I agree with you in terms of the importance of transparency, and one of the things that we have discussed and are going to make sure happens at those deep dives, there is a proper reporting mechanism back into the Culture Committee and, if necessary, up to the London Policing Board.
Right, okay, well, I hear what you say on that one. How is MOPAC supporting the work being undertaken to research and analyse the corporate issues facing the Met? Deputy Mayor.
On the corporate issues facing the Met, I mean, one of the, again, it's coming back to the London Policing Board, because the London Policing Board have been very keen and clear, as have we, that one of the things we don't want to do is pick off just particular items or particular issues, that there are underlining factors that are causing the problems within the Met, as the Commissioner has been very clear around the work in New Met for London around fixing the foundations. So in terms of MOPAC, what we have done is, we've discussed around oversight of misconduct, but we've also we are also undertaking oversight in conjunction with the London Policing Board around those issues that are strategic issues for the Met. DARA has undertaken many a review of the Metropolitan Police and has done reports and audits around what are those underlying issues around people skills, supervision, training, management, leadership. Those are the really key issues around fixing the foundations that we are having oversight of. But there are also key issues that we are working with the Met to support, and the Mayor has also invested in. Last year's budget put investment into leadership training, which is underway, put investment into METCC and victim support. So it's a combination of oversight, support and investment.
Yes, it is of concern to me that so much money is going into oversight when, in my view, the Metropolitan Police should be resourced in a better way. But that we are where we are at the moment. How is MOPAC overseeing the Met's external expertise appointments, and what are the results of that oversight?
So as you know, the Commissioner and his leadership team have operational control and have the decision-making around who they bring in, unless it breaches a certain threshold, which then it will come to me for decision. So some of the framework agreements come to me, I think you pulled out from the London Policing Board papers this issue of external expertise coming in. One of the things that they did commission, and rightly commissioned, in the developing the new Met for London, again, it's around building on the work of DARA, which is what are the fundamental foundational issues within the Metropolitan Police. So that is one of the pieces of work that was undertaken. It did come, that work came to the turnaround board that the Commissioner chairs, that I sit on, as did many other partners sit on as well, to look at what that is. Again, those are issues around skills, capability, supervision, management processes and structures. And so we have, part of our oversight is ensuring that those issues feed into the London Policing Board, but also we are keeping track of them as a part of our oversight and the work that we do within MOPAC.
Okay, and can this board have copies of things that are feeding into the board?
So, of course, anything that's ours that we can publish, we will be very happy to let you have, but some of those papers that I've just discussed are Metropolitan Police ones, which you'll have to ask them for.
Well, we will do. So much resources going into this other board. If only that resource had come in to assist the democratically elected board, which is what we are, I think we'd have all been happier. But I look forward to hearing the figures and how much extra you're putting into MOPAC to scrutinise. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I have Assemblymember Devonish and then Assemblymember Bailey wanting to come in with follow-ups.
Thank you. To the Deputy Mayor, in terms of oversight, would you prefer that these meetings, as they used to do, included a senior police officer, either the Commissioner or the Deputy Commissioner?
That's a good question. I actually think, I've always thought, having a senior leader of the Met come as well was good and interesting, but actually I think you're doing more scrutiny of MOPAC now, and that's good for public transparency and public accountability, and that is your role, to scrutinise MOPAC and the Mayor. And I think we could get to a good balance where you have the Metropolitan Police a lot coming regularly, but not every time, and you scrutinising myself and senior members of the MOPAC. I think that's quite good for democracy, that I feel that we are under more scrutiny, and rightly under more scrutiny from you as a committee than we were before.
And in terms of the policing board, how would you define the speed of progress? If we say gear 1 for a card up to gear 5, what speed are we motoring at the moment, do you think?
London Policing Board's first meeting was in September. We're just about end of January. I think in terms of speed of setting it up, speed of the members getting to grips with key issues for the Met, I think it's incredibly, I think it's actually pretty impressive in terms of, from a standing start to where we are, to identifying the key issues and to having the first meetings, which I think have been useful and constructive. I think it's been, I think it's a good and quick start. There's more work to be done. It takes time. It's not just the London Policing Board, but it obviously takes time to reform a large organisation like the Metropolitan Police. The London Policing Board is absolutely getting up to speed to be able to do that, and is already proving, in terms of its questions, that it can hold the Metropolitan Police, and help hold the Metropolitan Police to account, and actually get into some of the key questions. I don't know whether you've had the chance to watch the Budget and Performance Committee. I thought it was incredibly useful conversation and discussion around the budget, around prioritisation, and it certainly, I know it gave the Metropolitan Police food for thought, and there was a lot of follow-up from that meeting.
Thank you. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. To the Deputy Mayor, this morning we've talked about the number of boards you sit on, the number of boards that Judith sits on, all the meetings you attend, all the conversations that go on. Are you worried that we are having a lot of conversations and not getting anywhere? We've both worked in government before. We both know that often the win is seen in having the meeting. Are you worried that there's a lot of conversation and not a lot of action?
I think, I take your point around, absolutely, sometimes it can be seen as the outcome as a meeting. That's not the case for me. That's not the case for MOPAC. The outcome is an improvement in the reform and change in the Metropolitan Police. And the important thing is what what is discussed within those meetings, how it is tracked, and that comes down to quarterly performance reports, that comes down to some of the figures that we've talked about today in terms of increase in suspensions, increase in volume of conduct cases. If you weren't seeing that type of thing moving, I would agree with you. The meetings are for meeting's sakes, but I don't agree with that, because I think it's, you know, we can see movement, we can see and we can understand where the Met are putting their resources. We, you know, for the meetings, I discussed, I've flagged as a meeting with the Assistant Commissioner Barbara Gray around the transformation around the Directorate of Professional Standards and bringing in the local ones into this, you know, into a central management feature. We are tracking that, and that is incredibly important.
Because in the past, it's often been a little bit difficult to hold MOPEC to KPIs, and I just hope internally that you are, you know, having solid outcomes from all the meetings you had. And the other question I wanted to ask, we are talking about a growth in suspensions, etc., etc. Are we sure that that is a good thing? Are we prosecuting the right people here? Are we getting? Oh, is it just? Because I speak to a lot of police officers, and their big worry is the win for us, the politicians, as one put it to me, is just getting those numbers up. His big worry was, are those people actually guilty? So are you certain that the processes you're using to bring these people out, because you and I would agree there is a lot of change that needs to happen in the Met, but are you positive? Could you go back to rank and file officers and say this is not a witch hunt, this is accurate work being conducted properly?
I'll bring Judith in because she really has the oversight of that. Of course, those processes are mostly processes that are managed by the Metropolitan Police around appropriate authority authorisation, and there's been training put in post-KC to make sure that there's better decision making around the appropriate authority. There's also Judith's talked about this, a very, very clear, complicated, yes, but clear processes that are set down by regulation about how misconduct, particularly gross misconduct, is undertaken within the Metropolitan Police. And then, the most severe cases go to a panel which is chaired by a legally qualified person, and there is transparency there, and the outcomes of those are also published and transparent. But of course, you've got to be really clear about the decision-making process, and that's something I think I'll bring Judith in on that one.
I was just going to make the point as well. Of course, a lot of cases that we're seeing are criminal cases. Mm-hmm. We're seeing criminal allegations against police officers and then putting through the criminal system, and they are being convicted. I don't like to see it, but I think it's the right thing that is happening. And as the Deputy Mayor has explained, the misconduct hearing process, the panel is an independent panel. We've got a legally qualified chair, we've got an independent panel member, there is a police member as well. But I'm confident that that's a fair process in which officers are judged.
How many people who are referred to these panels are, sanctioned and cases are not?
Assembly Member Bailey, you are straying into the next section.
Excuse me, because I spoke to a number of police officers, and that was their nervousness. They said to me that morale is low, because it seems like we are just trying to get people into the process to get the numbers up so the politicians can claim a win. Now, that's a frontline police officer's view of it. That's why I'm asking this line of questions, just because I want to be able to go back to him and his colleagues and say, no, this is organised, reasonable, professional work. I think it's important for their morale. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Pigeon.
Lovely. I've got a few questions to ask, and I've got a couple that I just want to pick up from what we heard earlier. But we're talking about legally qualified chairs, so let's start there. And obviously, you've got a much higher caseload going through, which you've described this morning. We've heard about previously. So, what progress are you making on the recruitment of these legally qualified chairs? How many more have you recruited? How many are needed? What's the kind of time frame you're working to?
Well, I'm pleased to say, although it was hard graft, I've spent a number of days in interviews for legally qualified chairs, and we've recruited an additional 20 legally qualified chairs who have had their training. They had an induction yesterday with the Metropolitan Police, and within a month they will be essentially on our list. And they will be taking cases.
And how many do you already have on your list? So what does this bring
we
the total
already have
to?
14
Wow, so this is more than doubling.
Actually, yeah, it's a significant number that we were that you know the commissioner laid down the challenge to me
Right,
in terms of actually getting those legally qualified chairs in. There is a backlog of approximately 300 officers waiting a hearing. Now, some of those will be accelerated hearings as opposed to standard track, which is the ones that the legally qualified chairs do. But yes, we've met that challenge in terms of ensuring that legally qualified chairs are there to take those hearings. Of course, when the changes come, the government have announced changes. That will be something obviously that we work with. But yes, we've done that.
Brilliant. And then I picked up that there was an issue around indemnity. Have you managed to resolve that with the Home Office and the Met? What progress have you made?
The issue of it's essentially immunity to challenging the decisions. That is still a remaining issue. The government did state that when they looked at the reforms of the misconduct system, that it would be something that they would consider. Politely, I'd say it looks like they've kicked it into the long grass. Because legally qualified chairs, and perhaps as they say that the role is disappearing, they're saying that there's almost no need for it. But the legally qualified chairs are clear, all panel members are clear that they need that indemnity. And MOPAC, we provide that indemnity for them so that they've got the confidence that as long as they operate in good faith, that they will be protected.
Great, thank you. Just got a couple of slight questions from the discussion earlier. You were talking earlier about workforce data. And I had asked about this several months ago, about why LGBT plus was not part of the data and what you were doing to encourage that, because obviously it's a huge issue. And we talked about disproportionality earlier. What has gone on? I mean, I asked that question last autumn. What things are you trying to do? You said earlier, got to work with the Met, got to improve data collection. But are there any specific lines of work to try to improve this data collection?
The issue of LGBT data is a particular concern that we, as say, I have raised with the Met on a number of occasions. There is progress in terms of the system in which they record it. They now can record the data. They have the data. The issue, of course, is declaring. Yes, is whether or not officers and staff have the confidence to actually declare that. And that clearly is work that the Met need to do in order to give staff that confidence. But I am very hopeful that we will be able to, also the Met will be able to publish the data of LGBT staff very soon.
Lovely.
In order that we can start to see those numbers. The numbers will be small, and I know that.
It's important.
But that's the first step, isn't it?
Yeah, lovely. Thank you for that. And then I also wanted to pick up alongside looking at this misconduct. A Met Operation Onyx, which showed the answer I've just had to Mayor's question. 1,409 Met police officers remain under investigation for sexual abuse. Of the original 1,636 officers that have been identified. That's been going on for over a year. Only sort of 200 cases have been finalised. At this rate, it's going to take, 6 years to get through it? Do you have any, is that separate to the misconduct stuff, or is this part of it? Can you talk us through what's being done to accelerate that? Because I think many Londoners will be worried that there are people who've got serious issues, are under investigation for serious issues, and they are working in the front line.
Yes, I think one of the things with, certainly with Operation Onyx, we just need to be really careful on is the language. There are not 1,400 investigations going on into those officers and staff. All those individuals have been assessed, and they are now looking at those cases to say, were there any, for example, investigative lines of inquiry that were missed or weren't followed through when the case was originally considered? So if you recall, these are all cases that were closed, either finalised because of they went through the misconduct process and they were retained in the service, or there was a decision that there was no case to answer and there was no investigative process that actually took place. So what this process is now is looking really, really carefully at each of those cases and say, what was that? What was the incident? Was it fully explored? Was there every opportunity to ensure that that officer should have been put through, for example, an investigative process? So that some of the cases may be, for example, an individual comment that an officer made. So perhaps a sexist comment that the officer made. It might be one word, right the way through the spectrum to allegations of sexual offences or more serious like rape. So there is a process ongoing that's been that the Met have done, really carefully assessed each of those cases and say what risk does that pose, and those at the higher end are the ones that clearly they are focusing on in the first instance to prioritise any investigations or, as I say, lines of inquiry. So yes, it is going to take some time, but the thing that I can be reassured is that they are actually focusing on those who they believe are of highest harm.
Okay, but it's still a significant number, isn't it? And it's still very worrying that these people are still working, and yet some of them may be under being reinvestigated for some really serious matters.
Yes, but as I said, of those that are of the highest risk, they have restrictions in place, they have measures in place. Some of them will already be suspended or restricted, so there will be a mixture. But they've all got risk management processes in place to ensure that the Met know exactly where they are and what they're doing.
That's very good. Right, my final question is around the Directorate, this new plan for a Directorate of Culture, Diversity and Inclusion. Wondering, can you give us a flavour when this is going to be, obviously it's the Mets and developing the plans, but how are you working with them and when will it be up and running, how it's being developed, and also talk us through how you think it's going to work in practice with MOPAC.
That's a work in progress around the Directorate of Culture, Diversity and Inclusion. The Met have recently appointed Pippa Mills to lead it, to lead up that. And as I think you'll probably come on to, they have been out to recruitment for a Director of Culture and Change, twice, but unfortunately it's very, very disappointing. And they're right not to appoint if you don't get the right calibre. It's better to...
Completely agree.
And it's always a difficult decision, but they are right not to appoint. That has been in conjunction with MOPAC in terms of the recruitment and sitting on the board for that recruitment as well. We've had senior leader on that as well. They are the plans are at different stages of development. Basically, it is a work in progress. So, for example, within that we have the London Race Action Plan, which we've discussed. We also have in terms of the CDI plans right across the Met. It's early stages at the moment to know whether to be able to know whether it's going to have the impact it's got, because it is being developed at the moment. They've also have been very clear about the importance of community voices and reference groups in that. So they are engaging with a community reference group, which was set up to support the London Race Action Plan, and they've also engaged with a youth community reference group and also the Community Outreach Fund partners as part of the process around the London Race Action Plan.
Okay, so they're working with those different groups to get that community engagement into what this looks like, but it's still very early days. Is that a summary of what you're saying?
I'd say that there's some work that's gone on already. So in fairness to the Metropolitan Police, they haven't kind of waited. They have done some work around values, which I'm sure you've heard about. Yes. So there is some work that's been done, and there's been some ongoing activity. They are considering essentially a plan that has 8 streams. I can't remember them all off the top of my head, if I'm honest, but for example, the
8 sounds an awful lot, but
yeah, it does. But there are some plans and there's some initiatives that have already been ongoing. But I think with Assistant Commissioner Pippa Mills coming in, it's an opportunity to take a fresh look to say where is that work got to, and being really clear about the vision for what they want to see. What does success look like?
Yes,
That's something that we've really encouraged the Met to try and be as clear as possible about, what will success look like? How will you know that you're going in the right direction and you're progressing? Because it's a really difficult issue to measure and monitor. But
and can you remind me of this AC, Pippa Mills? Is this an additional AC, or replacing someone?
It is an additional one. Yes,
that's what I thought. Okay, and then obviously you've got this issue that you've tried twice, gone out to the market, haven't found the right person. Are you rethinking the scope of this role? Where are you with that? Because I think you're absolutely right. Don't appoint the wrong person into a role, because that's worse than having it empty. I've seen that over many, many years. But what are you thinking in that space at the moment?
So this is a Met appointment, so it's what are the Met thinking? It's just
well, I've got no one from the Met to ask, as you know, you walked to that. But from your obviously advising them and giving them some steer, what's the thinking?
Yeah. So the Met are rethinking, rethinking the role, rethinking about the recruitment process, and I mean the Commissioner's reported that to the London Policing Board as well. They are rethinking, they're at the moment about reviewing, because if you go out twice and don't appoint, you've got to think about, well, is this, what is it why aren't you attracting the right calibre or the right people that you can't appoint? So yes, that is, and we do have discussions with that. I think one of the areas, and when I said it's early days, there is a significant amount of work underway in the Met in setting up this directorate. I think it's early days in order to assess the impact of the directorate, is what I meant. Yeah. But I think one of the things that actually, I do consistently challenge the Met on, and it was an overarching issue in the Casey report, is bringing in outside expertise. I think they've still got a way to go on that. They have got very good policy that they will always, chief officer level, they will, go out to outside recruitment, which is very good. But you've got to make sure you're getting the right expertise in. And I still think there's, it's a challenge. We challenge them a lot on where is the expertise? Do you have the skills within the organisation already? How do you bring in that expertise? And how do you bring it in and not necessarily think it has to be an officer that is doing that?
Well, you'll have heard me many times pushing Mark and the Mayor to actually get people in who know what excellent culture looks like in a different organisation, because I fear some of the trends we're seeing in the Met will be across the police forces across the country. So actually, I would love them to bring someone in from a different sector who can just shine a light on different practice and really look at modernising. So I've been pushing them and have felt that we were going that way, but...
Yeah, and the Met they've been very clear about bringing in outside expertise. I think they need to do both around advice and the doing. So their non-executive directors, they've brought those outside expertise, one of which actually chairs a group around this as well. So they are really thinking quite creatively around bringing that advice in. I think advice is incredibly important and challenge is incredibly important, but you also need that expertise embedded.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I have another question from Assemblymember Hall.
Yeah, it's just a quick one. Sorry, Judith, to go back to this. So you said earlier there's 206 people that have been suspended, and then going back to what Assemblymember Pigeon was saying, so some officers that are being investigated or on packages or restricted duties, I think you put it. So do the colleagues know that they are under some sort of restriction? Is it well known around them that they are under restriction?
I'm going to say yes, but it might be something I need to check. But yes, I think they do, because clearly if an officer is if they're suspended, they're not at work. Yeah. If you're on a team with others, you will know that.
No, I get that. It's the ones that are
unrestricted. Their restrictions will vary. But for example, those that are not on public-facing duties, for example, I suspect that officers amongst their teams will be aware of that. Yes.
See, to be honest, whichever answer, to be fair to you, isn't fair on either side. Do you know what I mean? And I couldn't dream of an answer here, but it's not fair to somebody to be suspected of something if that person thinks this isn't fair, I'm innocent. Do you know what I mean? Equally, it's not fair to their colleagues if perhaps you have got somebody that's not as they should be, if they don't know about it. So I'm not criticising, because both answers are wrong, if you know what I mean. But all this shrieks of the fight that it's got to be dealt with very, very quickly, because this isn't fair to the officers or their colleagues, any of them. It's just unfair. So I do hope this gets sped up, because the one thing, even if people don't like what's going on, if they could say, well, I don't like it, but it is fair, we can all accept that. But this isn't fair any which way.
No, and as I said earlier, MOPAC under the Mayor's clear leadership, we put forward a number of reforms, and one of the issues was timeliness and how things could be speeded up. The Home Office have come back with some reforms. I'm not necessarily that hopeful that these will speed up the process, but we'll see.
Okay, and last, very quickly, Deputy Mayor, how are you altering your recruitment strategy to encourage more people to apply to be a police officer? Because we really have got to get, the numbers are dropping. Crime is not where it should be, we both know that. So how are you changing things in your recruitment strategy to encourage more to join?
So the Met have the recruitment strategy that we discussed with them, and they have spent a lot of time analysing, analysing where they need, what are the reasons people don't apply, and the Mayor has also funded an outreach programme for officers to go into communities to encourage people to apply. But they are constantly, this conversation and discussion that we have with Claire Davis, who heads this up, is really understanding what it is. How do you get through to the channels which will get through to people to give them, to incentivise them and think about joining the Metropolitan Police? It's not that there is a recruitment strategy that is just static and that will never be reviewed and revised. It's a continually reviewed and revised, depending on the figures that are coming through and depending on what is happening. I think the Met I know they are putting considerable resource into ensuring that they are, absolutely sort of straining every sinew to get people into the Met. But as we've just discussed at the beginning of this meeting, a really good recruitment strategy is not going to deal with the labour market, and a really good recruitment strategy is not going to deal with the cost of living in London and the other reasons that people aren't able to apply to the Met. And to other bits of the public sector.
It could be that there are other reasons that people are leaving, but we'll have to leave it there, I'm sure, Chair. Thank you.
I was just going to add, Assembly Member Hall, that of course you also want to ensure that you get the right people.
100%.
And one of the issues that we had is, have the Met been recruiting the right people? So the processes to ensure that we get the right people, including vetting, have to be very, very thorough. So it is about getting people to come to the door who want to, but we want to make sure we get the right standard of people.
We absolutely do. I agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of our questions today. So I would like to thank you both for attending this morning and for all your answers to our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Noted. Can I ask the committee to note the monthly report from MOPAC? Noted. And can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion?
Agreed.
Very much. And can I ask the committee to note the work programme for the 23-24 Assembly year? And the next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on Wednesday the 7th of February at 10 a.m. in committee rooms 2 and 3 at City Hall. I have no urgent business, so that concludes today's meeting.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.